from nothingness and suffering. Imagine the horrors of a 7-year-old girl as nights and days were torn apart by howls, wails, and dirges that never ceased, the wailing of infants still too soon, the broken cries of mothers clutching emptiness, and the hollow voices of fathers stunned into silence. Each echo rent the air like thick smoke, seeping into my soul and my shudders, teaching me that even the hours of light could be darker than the night. I am Miriam, sister of Moses the lawgiver, sister of Aaron the high priest. I began as nothing, and I remain nothing apart from the one who remembers us in our lowest state. My name not strength, my hands not power, and my heart has known more dirges than songs. We were all born beneath the weight of Egypt's shadow, a land that pressed us down until we could barely breathe. Our souls remember the moans and groans of our people as if they were carved into our very bones. We labored in fields not our own, bending under whips that tore our flesh, building walls and temples for gods we knew not. Our fathers' backs bent like broken reeds. Our mothers' hands raw from threshing mud and kneading bread, with wails and tears instead of water and oil. But I vividly remember the cries of children that rose in the night, climbing ever so high before being hushed into sudden silence. Those cries were not from hunger alone, but from fear, fear of soldiers, fear of orders that sought to strangle the promise God had given to Abraham. The Nile, which had been life, became a grave for little ones, whose only crime was being born Hebrew. I learned too early that sorrow has many names, and that mourning can wrap itself around people until it becomes their second skin. And we waited. Oh, how we waited. Generations upon generations, passing down not freedom, but an empty longing. We spoke of promises, but they felt like fading echoes, fragile against the roar of Egypt's cruelty. Our flesh tore, our bones cracked, and the whips lashed, endlessly. Each season bled into the next. The same fields, the same chains, the same unanswered prayers. How long, O God? How long will you hide your face? These were the whispers of the night, carried on weary breath from one heart to another. And yet, though our days were filled with the taste of dust, though hope felt thin as smoke, something unseen carried us. In our nothingness, in our breaking, God did not abandon us. His silence was not absence, though it pierced us like a blade. His waiting was not forgetfulness, though it felt endless. I have learned that suffering strips away illusions. Egypt taught me that I am weak, but it also taught me where true strength lies. In the darkness of oppression, I saw the faintest glimmer of light, not from myself, not from my people, but from the God who refuses to let his promises die. I am a daughter of sorrow, born in the midnight of Israel's bondage. I am a vessel cracked and empty, and yet chosen to carry a song. My story begins not in triumph, but in groaning, not in power, but in waiting, not in fullness, but in the barren cry for God to remember his people. Walk with me into this wilderness of waiting, where the soul bends low under suffering, and yet somehow, mysteriously, learns to lift its eyes. Walk with me into the stillness of our past, where we silently ached for God. And he, though hidden, was already moving. For it is in the nothingness, in the long shadows of oppression, his love begins to shine like dawn. For I, a child of bondage, was yet a daughter of promise, born into sorrow, yet carried by mercy, nothing yet seen. And this story is not mine, and not even of my brothers, but his. The Child and the Nile. I was still a child when the Nile became my secret hiding place. Pharaoh's decree had turned the river into a graveyard, a place where the cries of infants ended in hushed silence. My heart had already learned too much fear for its years. Every rustle at the door, every sound of soldiers' footsteps on the path sent dread down my spine. And in the crux of such dread, he was born. My brother, small, fragile, helpless, yet more radiant to me than the sun. When I looked into his face, I saw a mystery too great for words. My mother whispered of God's promises, of a deliverer who would come. I wondered in the hidden corners of my heart if perhaps heaven had bent close to cradle this child for such a time as this. But Pharaoh's command was ruthless. No son of Israel was safe. My mother wept as she hid him, sometimes choking his cries to hush him. Day after day, her arms shielding him from a death she could not bear. Yet babies cannot be hidden forever. His cries grew louder, his presence more dangerous. And so she wove a basket, sealing it with tar, her trembling hands daring to trust what her eyes could not see. She laid her son upon the prophetess, as if the Nile might somehow deliver what Egypt had sworn to destroy. I followed, silent, barefoot on the reeds. I was only a girl, yet every step felt like I was walking the edge of existence. My heart pounded as the basket rocked gently on the water, carrying both my brother and possibly our hope. I watched, breathless, as the river bore him toward the very palace that wanted him dead. And then, just as suddenly, she came. Pharaoh's daughter, stepping down to bathe, her handmaidens at her side. My heart froze. Surely this was the end. I had thought I knew fear before, but in that one moment, I felt fear as never before. But when she saw the basket and opened it, the cry of my baby brother pierced the air. I saw her face soften. She did not see a threat. She saw a child, an infant, and in that moment, her gaze tended in a place I never expected. I do not know what courage carried me, but I stepped forward from the reeds. My voice shook as I spoke. Shall I go and call a nurse for the child from the Hebrew women? Pharaoh's daughter looked at me, a trembling slave girl, and I somehow sensed she knew it all. She pondered while her sharpened gaze pierced me, and then she nodded. And so I ran, my feet flying across the dust, my heart pounding with awe. I brought my mother, and the impossible happened. She was given her own son back, to nurse him openly, under the protection of Pharaoh's own house. What we had tried to hide in the night of fear, God returned in the plain light of day. That day I learned what my soul still clings to, that even in the courts of Egypt, even in the shadow of Pharaoh, God's hand is not absent. He does not forget. He bends the hearts of kings and the daughters of kings. He plants seeds of deliverance in the very soil of oppression. I was only a girl, yet I had seen it with my own eyes. The God of Abraham, still moving. He did not abandon us. My brother lived, and with him, perhaps the promise yet lived too. And so I walked home with my mother that day, my heart wrapped around a hope too fragile to name. I did not know then all that would unfold, but I knew this: the Nile had not swallowed us whole, and God indeed had opened a way where there was no way. The silent years. The gentle waves of the river gave him back to us, but the silent tides of years tested us. I grew, as girls do, into womanhood. My hair lengthened. My hands grew rough with labor. My back bent beneath the weight of Egypt's endless demands. We lived in a land not ours, but we had no other. Our bodies built their palaces, their temples, their monuments to pride. Yet we were treated as less than dust. Morning came with whips cracking before the sun had even risen. The air carried the stench of sweat and clay. We were driven into the pits to knead mud with straw, hour upon hour, until our arms trembled and our fingers bled. If the straw was short, the lashes were sure to fill the lack. Every cry only fed the cruelty of the taskmasters. They laughed at our pain, as if our agony were the cord that powered their might. We buried more children than we named. Sons were torn from mothers' nursing arms, their cries silenced in the waters of the Nile. The very waters where I had once hidden my brother in a basket. Even the womb was not safe. Egypt tried with all its might to choke out our future before it could draw its first breath. And yet we waited. We prayed prayers that sometimes felt like nothing more than sighs swallowed by the hush. At night, when the fires burned low, we sat in silence. No songs, no laughter, only the heavy breathing of a weary people. I would look up at the stars, bright and far above the darkness of Egypt, and I wondered if the God of our fathers still remembered us. I clung to fragments, the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whispered from one generation to the next, like embers kept alive in the ashes. God had promised a land. God had promised descendants as many as the stars. But where was he now? Did he still see us? Did he still care? I would remember the night I placed my brother on the river, my heart torn in two. God had given him back to us then. But years passed and he was gone again, living under Pharaoh's roof, raised as if he belonged to the very house that oppressed us. Safe, yes, but far from us. Sometimes I raged in silence. Why save him if we all remained enslaved? Why rescue one child if mothers still wept for sons drowned in the Nile? I did not know then what I see now, that God was not absent, though the silence cracked open a greater silence. His work was hidden beneath the surface, like seeds buried in the darkness of earth. It seemed to us that he had forgotten, but all the while he was weaving redemption in secret threads, waiting for the appointed cloak of deliverance. And so we endured. We rose each day beneath the whip. We bent our backs to labor. We held one another in our grief. We waited, long, lonely years of waiting. But even in the waiting, Even in the silence, a whisper stirred in my spirit. The God who saved the child on the Nile has not forgotten his people. The return of my brother. The years had carved lines upon my face, but the ache of waiting never eased. Egypt still pressed us into the mud, still bent our backs low, still silenced the cries of mothers with their ruthless decrees. Hope was a fragile ember, dim and nearly gone. And then he returned. I saw him first from a distance, a figure striding into the camp of slaves, with the bearing of one who had known Pharaoh's courts, yet with a fire in his eyes that no palace could quench. My heart trembled within me. Could it be the child I had once laid among the reeds, the boy whose cries I had followed along the Nile, the son my mother nursed in secret, the brother I had loved and lost, now a man, standing among us? But he was not the same, no longer clothed in Egypt's silks, no longer speaking with the wisdom of Pharaoh's house. He bore the dust of the wilderness upon him, the weathered face of exile, and something greater, something fierce and holy, rested upon him. When he spoke, his words cut through the centuries of silence, like thunder rolling over dry land. The God of our fathers has heard your cries. He has sent me to lead you out. I trembled more. Could it be true? Had the God of Abraham remembered us? After all our sighs, after all our prayers that felt unanswered, could this be his answer? I looked at Moses, my brother, my blood. Once I had hidden him in a basket. Once I had dared to speak to Pharaoh's daughter, offering my mother as his nurse. Once I had wondered why God spared him when so many others perished. Now, at last, I began to see. God had preserved him for this hour, hidden him in Pharaoh's own house, shaped him in desert solitude, and returned him to us clothed not in Egypt's authority, but in heaven's call. Still, doubts gnawed at the edges of my faith. Egypt was vast, unshakable, mighty. Who were we to stand against them? Who was Moses to confront Pharaoh? Yet when I searched his face, I saw something unearthly, something not of his own making. And in that moment, the ember of hope, long buried beneath ash, flared again. The God who once rescued a child from the waters had not forgotten his people. He was moving, at last, through the very brother I had once guarded in secret. The God who confronts Pharaoh. When Moses spoke of God's command to confront Pharaoh, my heart quivered. How could it be? We, the children of the lash, the bearers of bricks and straw, daring to stand before the throne of Egypt. I had seen Pharaoh's power with my own eyes, his soldiers gleaming in bronze, his chariots flashing in the sun, his cruelty striking down children as though their cries meant nothing. Egypt's throne seemed immovable. Carved in stones we carried, and in the blood we shed. Yet my brother, the same child I once watched float helplessly on the Nile, now walked back into Pharaoh's halls with the authority of heaven burning in his voice. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may worship me. At those words, something shook in me. It was not Moses I heard. It was the God who had hidden us in silence, who had borne our groans through centuries. His voice thundered through my brother's lips, and Egypt wondered at the frailty of those words. Pharaoh's heart was hard, like a stone clenched in a fist. He laughed. He mocked, and he increased our burdens. I watched our people stagger under heavier loads, their backs breaking, their hope bleeding out into the dust. My heart cried out, "O Lord, why stir our longing if deliverance is not yet?" But then the signs began. Moses cast his staff, and before the throne of Pharaoh it became a serpent. Egypt's magicians tried to mimic, but their power faltered. The staff of God devoured theirs. I felt a tremor in my soul. This was no dream, no illusion. The God of Abraham was pulling back the veil of silence. The plagues followed, swift and terrible. The Nile, our oppressor's pride, turned to blood. Frogs swarmed into their temples, gnats into their courts, pestilence into their fields. Egypt's gods, one by one, bowed low, stripped of their false strength. And yet, Pharaoh's heart hardened still. I confess, I feared. I feared Egypt's anger. I feared Pharaoh's retaliation. I feared the unknown path unfolding before us. But greater still, I feared the Lord, the God who could command nature itself, who could humiliate the mightiest kingdom, who could stretch out his hand to strike down oppressors and lift up his people. And in my fear, a strange comfort grew. If he could confront Pharaoh, he could carry us. If he could break Egypt's power, he could mend our wounds. So I held fast to the trembling hope rising within me. The God who once saved a baby from the Nile was now saving a nation from bondage. And then a sudden realization broke through me. Pharaoh in all his might was but dust before my holy God. The night of deliverance. That night, that echo of the cries of mothers and fathers alike, I will never forget it. The air itself felt heavy, as though heaven bent low upon the earth. We had prepared as Moses commanded, a lamb for each household, spotless and unbroken. With trembling hands, I watched the blood smeared upon our doorposts, crimson against clay, a mark both terrible and tender. Inside, the lamps burned low. Our family sat together, our garments girded, our sandals strapped, staffs in hand as though ready to run. The roasted lamb's scent filled the room, mingling with bitter herbs that stung the tongue and reminded us of Egypt's cruelty. Every detail carried weight. Every bite spoke of something greater, judgment and mercy entwined. And we waited. Outside, silence pressed close, yet beneath it was the sense of something vast moving, something unseen. My heart pounded like a drum in the dark. I thought of the warnings Moses gave. The Lord himself will pass through Egypt this night. Where there is no blood of the lamb, death will enter, but where the blood covers, he will pass over. Then the cries began. Passover indeed. One voice, then another, rising like a wave, swelling through the streets of Egypt, wails of terror, of mothers clutching lifeless sons, of households struck down in judgment. The sound pierced the night, tore through my bones, and I held my breath. Death had entered Egypt. The destroyer walked among them. But in our dwelling, under the mark of the blood of the Lamb, there was stillness. The presence of death did not cross our threshold. Instead, an unseen mercy stood guard at our doors. My soul shuddered with fear, yet even more with awe. How could blood upon wood shield us from wrath? What power lay hidden in this sign? As the night wore on, the cries of Egypt did not cease. I pressed my hands to my ears, but still they reached me, and I wept. For though Egypt had been cruel, still they were flesh and blood, and God had shown himself a God who does not forget, who does not look lightly upon injustice. Their strength had become their downfall. At last word came. Pharaoh had broken. His command raced through the night. Rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel. Take your flocks and your herds, and be gone. And bless me also. We left in haste, our hands trembling, our kneading bowls wrapped in cloaks, our children pressed to our sides. The blood still fresh upon our doors, the unleavened bread in our packs, the memory of death behind us, we stepped into the dawn of freedom. I looked back once at the land that had crushed us, the land where graves of our fathers lay, the land where Pharaoh's heart was harder than stone. Egypt, mighty Egypt, was broken in a single night. And I knew it was not our strength, not our numbers, not our cunning. It was the Lord, the God who remembered, the God who redeemed, the God who passed over. The night of deliverance had become the doorway to a new life. And I, Miriam, walked through trembling, knowing that every step forward was God's mercy. The Sea and the Song. We had gone out in haste, but Pharaoh's rage was not yet finished with us. Word spread through the camp like fire. The Egyptians were coming. Chariots thundered behind us, wheels cutting into the wilderness, soldiers armed with vengeance, their cries carried by the wind. I seized. Had our deliverance only been a cruel dream? Would Egypt drag us back in chains? Before us lay the sea, vast and merciless, waves rolling like mammoth walls. Behind us, death charged with horses and steel. Around us, fear grew like a storm. Mothers clutched their children. Men raised trembling hands in despair. I too felt the weight of terror press upon me, until hope seemed but a slim thread. But then Moses, my brother, stood firm. His voice, unshaken, rang out above the cries. Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. The Egyptians you see now, you shall never see again, for the Lord fights for you. And then it happened. Moses lifted his staff over the waters. The wind rose, fierce and unyielding, tearing through the night with the breath of heaven. I watched in disbelief as the sea shuddered under the press of a strong east wind all through the night, then split apart, and those walls of mammoth water obeying his staff, rising up on either side, the seabed laid bare like a road carved by the hand of God himself. We stepped forward, our feet pressing into the damp earth where waves once raged. Children clung to their mothers. Men held lanterns high, and the people of Israel moved as one through the path of the sea. I walked with them, each step trembling with awe. The walls of water towered beside me, glistening with the moon's light. It was as though we were walking through the heart of creation itself. Behind us, Pharaoh's chariots plunged into the path. The roar of hooves and wheels echoed in the hollow chamber of the sea. Fear clawed at me, but then the Lord acted. Confusion struck the soldiers. Wheels twisted and broke, their cries mingling with the crash of the waves. And when the last of Israel's feet had touched the far shore, my brother stretched out his hand once more, and the waters fell. With a thunder like the breaking of the world, the sea collapsed, swallowing chariots, riders, and pride alike. The waters closed, and Egypt's strength was drowned in a single breath. On the far shore we stood in silence, the spray of the waves still fresh on our faces, watching as our oppressors vanished beneath the waves. And then our silence turned to song. This song rose not from one voice, but from many, from hearts unshackled at last. Moses sang of the Lord's triumph, of his right hand shattering the enemy, of his unfailing love guiding his redeemed. And I, Miriam, took a timbrel in my hand. The rhythm of deliverance beat against my palm, and I led the women forth in dance. Our feet struck chords with the earth, and our voices soared. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. Tears streamed down my face, not of sorrow, but of joy too great to contain. The God who remembered us in bondage had brought us out in freedom. The sea was behind us, and his promise lay ahead. That day I learned what it meant to worship with all one's soul. Not in theory, not in ritual, but in raw, overflowing gratitude. The song was not only ours, it was the song of heaven echoing through us. And I knew this God who split seas and silenced kings would never abandon us. The song was not just for that day. It was for every desert step to come. A melody to carry us through the wilderness. A reminder that when all seems lost, the Lord makes a way. And so I sang, not only for myself, but for all generations yet unborn, who would know that the God of Israel is the God who saves. The wilderness testing. The sea was behind us, but freedom did not taste as sweet as I had dreamed. For though Egypt's chains were broken, the wilderness became our new trial. The desert stretched wide and unending, a furnace of heat by day, a hollow, cold by night. The wandering pressed heavy upon us, broken only by the cries of children, the shuffling of weary feet, and the groans of the hungry. At first we walked with songs still in our mouths, the timbrels echoing the music of deliverance. But soon the song gave way to murmurs. Water ran short, bread vanished from our hands, and stomachs ached with emptiness. I too felt the gnawing of hunger, not only in my body, but in my spirit. Freedom did not fill us, it stripped us bare. We had cried to God for rescue, and he had torn Egypt's pride apart for our sake. Yet in the wilderness, his ways seemed hidden again. Why lead us into a land so barren? Why bring us here if only to wither in thirst? The people's voices grew sharp, accusing, bitter, as if slavery itself had been kinder than this desert road. But the Lord had not forsaken us. He never does. At Marah, when the waters were bitter, Moses cried out, and God turned the bitterness sweet. At Elim, he spread before us 12 springs and 70 palms, a quiet garden in the sand. When our hunger burned like fire, he rained down manna, bread of heaven, white as dew, sweet as promise. In the evenings, quail filled the camp, and the air itself carried his provision. Yet still we doubted. Still I doubted. I watched the people gather manna each morning, their faces bent toward the ground, as though the answer to all our questions lay in the dust. And perhaps it did, for every crumb was a whisper. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. The wilderness was not merely a place of thirst and hunger. It was a mirror held up to our souls. We saw our frailty, our fear, our stubborn longing for what we had lost. Egypt still clung to us, not in chains, but in memory. And in those barren miles, I came to see. The wilderness was not punishment, but purification. God was teaching us the rhythm of trust. To wake each morning not with certainty, but with dependence. To walk each step not by sight, but by faith. To believe that the one who split the sea would not abandon us in this sand. It was in those long days that my heart learned its truest prayer. Not for ease, not for plenty, but simply, "Give us this day our daily bread." And though my lips still faltered, though my faith wavered like a flame in the wind, I began to see the wilderness as the place where God bends close. For when all else is stripped away, His nearness becomes the only thing that sustains. The Mountain of Fire. We came at last to the mountain. Sinai, vast, terrible and holy. Its peaks pierced the heavens, clothed in thunder, veiled in flame. The ground trembled beneath our feet, as though creation itself bowed before the presence that descended. I remember standing at the edge of the camp, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. We had seen the might of God in Egypt. We had walked between walls of water at the sea. Yet here His nearness was different. Not rescue, not provision, but raw holiness. It was not a God against a Pharaoh we beheld, but a God whose voice shakes heaven and earth. The mountain burned. Smoke billowed like a furnace. Lightning tore through the sky, and a trumpet blast grew louder, louder still, until it seemed the sound would tear me apart. The people trembled. Children clung to their mothers, men shielded their eyes, and all of us shrank back in fear. I too shook, for I knew we could not stand before such majesty and live. Yet Moses went up. Alone, he climbed into the fire, into the cloud, into the voice. My brother, the child I once watched in a basket of reeds, now stood before the eternal flame. I could not comprehend it. Mere flesh ascending into holiness. It was as if God Himself had reached into the dust and said, "Come up, for I will speak with you." The waiting was long. Days stretched into weeks. The people grew restless, fearful, aching for something they could see, something they could touch. My heart wavered, too. I wondered if He had been consumed by the fire. I wondered if God had turned His face away from us. The wilderness had stripped us bare, and now this silence threatened to undo us. But in that silence, I also sensed the truth. God was teaching us what it means to belong to Him. He was not just delivering us from Egypt, but binding us to Himself. At Sinai, the covenant was spoken, not merely words on stone, but fire etched upon our hearts. We were no longer slaves of Pharaoh. We were a people set apart for the living God. When Moses returned, his face shone with the radiance of glory. I could hardly look upon him. The law was given, commandments carved by the very hand of God. They were not chains, but gifts, boundaries of love to shape us into His people. Holiness was not meant to crush us, but to draw us near, near enough to hear his voice, near enough to walk in his ways. And yet fear still lingered. Holiness is weighty. It reveals what is hidden, exposes what is unclean. Sinai was not only fire upon a mountain, it was fire upon our souls, burning, refining, consuming. It asked of us everything. Even now when I close my eyes, I see the mountain of flame. I hear the thunder of his voice. I feel the trembling of the earth. And I know the God who shook Sinai has chosen to dwell with us. He, the consuming fire, walks among tents of dust. This is both terror and tenderness, judgment and mercy, the paradox of his love. For in his burning we are not destroyed, we are made his. The golden calf. But then the silence of Sinai stretched too long. We had waited and waited, our eyes fixed on the mountain, our hearts gnawed by fear. Moses had gone into the fire, and he did not return. Days turned into weeks, and every sunrise pressed the question deeper into our bones. Has he been consumed? Has God left us? Are we now abandoned in this wilderness? I felt it too. The ache of uncertainty, the hollow weight of waiting. Hope can wither when it stretches thin in the desert heat. Even my own faith wavered, like a flame fighting against the wind. And then came the murmuring. First whispers, then rising voices, then demands. Make us gods who will go before us. We do not know what has become of this Moses. My heart twisted at their words, but I did not speak. My brother Aaron, pressed by their clamour, yielded. He gathered the gold, earrings, bracelets, fragments of treasure carried from Egypt, and from the fire he shaped a calf. A God we could see, a God we could touch, a God fashioned by human hands. When I saw it, my soul shuddered. This was not the God of the burning bush, not the one who split the sea, not the voice that thundered from Sinai. And yet the people danced, they feasted, they sang songs of worship to this golden image. Their laughter was wild, their joy empty, their celebration hollow. I stood apart, torn in two. I wanted to cry out, to tear down the idol, to remind them of the one who had carried us like an eagle on his wings. But another voice whispered, perhaps they are right. Perhaps God has abandoned us. Perhaps we are fools to keep waiting. Oh, how heavy that silence was, heavier than any chain in Egypt. Waiting unmakes the heart. Waiting strips away certainty until all that remains is raw hunger. And in that hunger, we reached for what we could control, for what our hands could shape. We wanted God's nearness without his fire, his blessing without his holiness. And then Moses returned. His face blazed with fury and sorrow, his arms bearing the covenant of stone. When his eyes fell upon the calf, upon the dancing, upon the revelry, the tablet shattered. Stone upon stone, and in that sound my heart broke with them. I realized then how fragile we were, how quickly we traded glory for glitter, presence for pretense, the eternal for the perishable. We were a people redeemed, yet still slaves. Not of Pharaoh this time, but of our own restless hearts. I wept, not only for them, but for myself, for the doubts I had let take root, for the silence I kept when truth burned in my chest, for the way my faith faltered in the waiting. Sinai's fire revealed the God who is holy. The golden calf revealed the people who are weak. And yet, even here, mercy did not let us go. Wrath fell, judgment struck, but God did not abandon us. The covenant was renewed. Broken tablets were replaced with new ones, and his presence remained among us. This is love I cannot understand, that the God we betray still binds himself to us again and again, that he carries a people whose hearts wander, whose faith cracks, whose worship falters. I learned then that love is not proven in the absence of failure, but in the persistence of God's faithfulness. Even when our hands build idols, his hand did not let us go. The waters of strife. Thirst. It is a small word, but it gnaws at the body like fire. It dries the tongue until speech feels like dust. It cracks the lips and weakens the knees. It steals patience, kindness, memory, until all that remains is desperation. The desert stripped us bare. Day after day the sun blazed down, and the winds carried no mercy. When we came to Kadesh, there was no water, none for the children, none for the animals, none for the weary ones who had carried hope this far. The people's voices rose again, sharp with fear, bitter with complaint. Why have you brought us here? Was it only to die in this wilderness? Would we not have been better off in Egypt, where rivers flowed? Their cries pierced me, for I felt the same ache. I, too, longed for Egypt's waters, though they had been mixed with tears. I, too, wanted relief. My throat burned, my heart trembled, my faith sagged under the weight of thirst. I watched my brother. His shoulders bent under their accusations, and Aaron's face grew pale with helplessness. Once again he carried the burden of a people who could not see beyond their hunger, who could not believe beyond their thirst. Moses fell on his face before God, as he had done so many times, and the Lord spoke with such simple mercy, "Speak to the rock, and it shall give water." Ah, but how heavy the weariness of leadership can be. How sharp the sting of constant complaint. Anger welled up in Moses, a fire born of sorrow and frustration. He struck the rock, not once, but twice, his voice breaking with rage. "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" The water flowed, torrents of mercy spilling from stone. The people drank, their animals drank, their cries turned to relief. But heaven itself was grieved. For in that moment, Moses had not only struck the rock, he had struck the heart of God's holiness. He had placed himself in the center, as if the power were his to wield, as if he were the giver and not the servant. And in his anger, he misrepresented the God whose command was to speak and not to strike. I trembled as I drank. The water refreshed my body, but left a sorrow in my spirit. For I knew what it meant when God's holiness was pierced by our unbelief. I had seen it before, at the calf, at the Red Sea, in the wilderness cries. Again and again our frailty mocked his patience. And still, he gave water. What kind of love is this? To give to those who doubt? To feed those who complain? To quench the thirst of the ungrateful? Only the love of the Eternal, who cannot deny his own heart of mercy. Yet I saw in Moses' face the shadow of consequence. The promised land would not be his to enter. The weight of his misstep would follow him, even as water continued to pour out and save the people. As I stood there, water on my lips and sorrow in my chest, I felt the truth pierce me. Faith is not only about crossing seas or singing in victory. Faith is about trust in the silence, obedience in the little commands, surrender when strength is gone. We drank deeply that day, but I learned something deeper than thirst. That the rock is not only struck, it is patient. That God is not only holy, he is merciful. That even when leaders fail and people grumble, his love still flows. The desert teaches slowly, painfully, but I am learning. God does not withhold himself, even from the unworthy. And I am always unworthy, yet still he gives living water. The wound of my pride. There are wounds that no desert thorn can pierce, no sun can scorch, no stone can bruise. They are the wounds of the spirit, silent, hidden, but burning long after the body has healed. I carry such a wound. It began with pride, though I did not name it so at the time. I had walked beside Moses from the river's edge. I had watched him lifted into Pharaoh's courts, then called out of the wilderness by flame. I had seen the staff in his hand split seas, bring bread, draw water, and summon the thunder of God himself. But somewhere inside me a whisper grew. Am I not also chosen? Does God speak only through him? Have I not sung the song that led Israel to dance? Have I not been called prophetess? Aaron and I spoke together in hushed tones. Our words were cloaked in questions, but underneath them was a restless envy. We challenged Moses, not with swords, but with murmurs. Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? The words left my lips like arrows, sharp, hidden behind the veil of reason, but poisoned at the tip. And God heard. The cloud descended. The presence of the Holy One fell heavy upon us. His voice thundered with a grief that cut deeper than rebuke. Moses is my servant, faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, not in riddles. Why then were you not afraid to speak against him? My heart froze, my pride shattered. And when the cloud lifted, my flesh bore the mark of my rebellion. White as snow, a leper. I, who had danced before the women in joy, now shrank in shame, my body a mirror of my diseased heart. The people gasped, recoiled. My skin declared my sin. My own brother, the priest, cried out to Moses, "O my Lord, do not lay this sin upon us. Let her not be as one dead." Moses, the one I had wounded, the one I had envied, prayed for me. Heal her, O God, I beseech thee. Oh, the sting of that mercy, that he would plead for me when I had spoken against him. But God in his wisdom decreed I must bear the shame. I was cast outside the camp 7 days. Alone, banished. The voices of Israel dimmed in the distance, while silence wrapped around me like a grave. There, outside the camp, I tasted the bitterness of my pride. Every breath was heavy with regret. Every hour revealed the truth I had hidden from myself. that envy is poison, and pride blinds the eyes, that I had not warred against Moses, but against God himself. The desert wind pierced me, but deeper still was the wound of guilt. I remembered the faces of the women I had once led, and now wondered, would they ever follow me again? I remembered the joy of the timbrel, but my hands trembled empty. I remembered my nearness to my brother, and felt the distance I had carved with my own words. 7 days of exile, 7 days of silence, 7 days of wrestling with my own heart. And in that silence, I found a strange gift, repentance. I wept until my spirit lay bare before him. I confessed not only my words, but the pride that birthed them, the envy that hid beneath them. I saw myself not as prophetess, not as leader, but as nothing, alive only by his breath. When the 7 days ended, the camp waited for me. Israel did not move until I returned. They welcomed me back, but the scar within remained. For I knew I had stained my calling with arrogance. Even now, as I walk with the people, the memory burns. It humbles me, restrains me, keeps me low before the God whose holiness is fire. And yet, in the shadow of my shame, I see the mercy that did not destroy me, but restored me. I carry the guilt, yes, but I also carry the grace. The grace that my exile was not forever, the grace that my leprosy faded, the grace that my God still called me his own. This is my wound. This is my song of repentance. That even in disgrace, he does not abandon. That even when pride burns, his mercy flows deeper. That he breaks, not to discard, but to heal. And so I walk on, scarred, but forgiven. The desert is quieter now. Not because the winds have ceased, nor because the people no longer murmur, but because something within me has stilled. It is the quiet that comes when a journey nears its end. I feel the nearness of death, not as a terror, but as a shadow that lengthens at dusk. My body is weary. The years of wandering lie heavy in my bones. My voice, once trebled to sing over timbrels, now trembles with age. My steps, which once danced in celebration, falter on the stones of Kadesh. I have lived long enough to see a generation buried in the sand. I have heard the wails of mothers, the sighs of fathers, the silence of graves unmarked in the wilderness. I have seen children grow into warriors, and warriors fall into dust. This desert has become our cradle and our grave. But in this fading, I am not abandoned. The Lord who brought me from the Nile has been my dwelling all these years. Even in my rebellion, he did not cast me away. Even in exile, he remembered me. Now, as my strength wanes, I feel his nearness more than ever. I think of the waters of the river where my eyes first saw my brother drawn out. I think of the Red Sea where my timbrel shook in triumph. I think of the springs we thirsted for, the manna that fell each dawn, the cloud that guided us, the fire that guarded us. Always wilderness and water, always thirst and provision, always waiting and mercy. And now I lie here in Kadesh, and I sense the last water is near, not of the earth, but of eternity. My lips are dry, but my soul tastes a spring that no desert can steal. Do I fear? Yes, a little. For death is a door I have not yet walked through. But I do not fear being forsaken. I have carried shame, but his mercy was greater. I have known exile, but he brought me back. I have stumbled, but he upheld me. What is death but another crossing? We once passed through the waters of the sea. Walls of judgment stood on either side, yet we walk through it on dry ground. Perhaps death is the same. The waters rise, but his hand parts away, and beyond it waits the land he promised. My eyes are dim, but within I see light. My heart is frail, but it beats with one last song. The Lord is faithful, his mercy endures forever. He has not forgotten his people. He will bring them into the land he swore, and when I close my eyes, I too shall rest in him. Let them remember me not for my failure, nor for my dance, but for this truth, that even in frailty, even in sin, even in death itself, his mercy remains. And so I yield. My spirit returns to the one who formed it, the one who sustained it, the one who will not let me go. The desert fades, the shadows fall, but his presence shines, and in that light I am home,